Hi, I'm Mara Webster within Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're incredibly fortunate to be joined by the wonderful Lesley-Ann Brandt to talk all about the Netflix series Lucifer. And I wanted to talk about what this show has required from you as an actor and as a performer, because it's a show that has such larger than life concepts and storylines and character beats, and particularly when you look at who Maze is as a character and as a woman on the show. And so, what was that journey for you in really having to be in a space and in a show that forces you to make really bold and larger decisions as an actor, but really have to commit to them in order for them to work, and particularly with the way that it's weaving between all these different tones and the type of comedy that it's asking from you as well?
Yeah, I think when we look back at season one, our show took a few episodes to find its tone, and that I think is typically the way with network television, because we were sort of funny, but there was a procedural aspect to it. But then you also had these celestial characters and trying to find a place of sort of harmony where they can all coexist and move the story forward. Took a minute. For me in particular, I really approached her very, I sort of took out the fact that she was a demon and really looked at her as an immigrant from hell and related to her in that way, being an immigrant myself, having lived in, New Zealand and the States, and trying to connect with her in that way. Because while she is from hell, she explores very human things. And so I walk this fine balance of always of being open to be explorative and vulnerable, and really find the layers of this woman, never judge her, even when she's doing things I don't necessarily agree with or don't understand personally. So giving her space to do that, and at the same time, always reminding the audience that she could end you in a minute, in a second, that she always had that like switch, which was something she acquired in order to survive. And I think that is very relatable as a human being. Is so many people have knee-jerk reactions to situations or experiences in life, and that's just like a defense mechanism, like a form of protection. Yeah.
Yeah. And her defense mechanisms have been really interesting to watch because they come out in so many different ways. And one of those ways is her sense of humor and the fact that it's very dry and very biting. And it's almost a distraction technique to make sure that people aren't looking at what's underneath and what she's happening. And so from an acting perspective, how do you approach scenes like that where you're playing into the comedy, but that's not actually really the emotion of the scene that you're playing at the same time as well?
I think we've all done that, is used humor as deflection and humor as protection. And so going into a scene, I'm always looking at, well, what is my super objective for this season? What is my objective for this episode? What do I want right now in the moment for this scene? And the fact that we can, touch on really deep things, but approach it from a humorous sort of perspective. I think it gives us permission as the actor to really explore and be as silly and big as we want to, and play and investigate, and that's the beauty of moving from a network show to a streamer, is that you get the time to do that. Like, you're not cutting to commercial. There's scenes can breathe. You can take a pause. You can be big, and explore it. And yeah, I sort of personally, I started in comedy in a half-hour show in New Zealand, but it's really just what is truthful, because comedy is comedy because it's truthful. It's funny if it's truth, and that's kind of where I play around with her. It's Tom actually is a character that an actor that does that very well. Like, I think that British dry wit too is to able to deliver some of those lines with like a straight face. uh, it takes practice, in the same way it takes practice to deliver that technical police jargon. I had a couple of episodes where I had to sort of do Chloe Decker talk, and Ella Lopez talk, and I was like, this is a lot of words that, as a character, I'm not used to, talking about things in that way. I play in the celestial world a lot more.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting that in the past you've brought up the idea of her inner child. And when you look at Maze as a character, she is someone who is very much still trying to heal her inner child and heal the trauma from her past. And obviously, with everything with her relationship with her mother and that feeling of abandonment and the way that that informs a lot of her relationship dynamics in the present. And is that something that you continue to think about a lot, even going into this final season, in the way that that played into a lot of the emotional beats and the emotional tracks, particularly looking at the relationship dynamic between her and Eve as they start to think about what their future might look like, in the moment when Eve says, maybe I want to have kids in the future, and the way that kind of makes her close up a little bit instantly.
Totally. I really did understand that. I'm blessed to have had a wonderful relationship with my mother and with my parents, but I know friends who have had real struggles with that. So that, looking at her relationship to her mother, it was really hard it's really hard to not judge Lilith, but I certainly couldn't do that playing the actress who was in it. It's that old saying of hurt people hurt people. She, in that moment, really thought the way she was rearing her children and the choices she was making as a parent were for their best interests. Let me armor them up for this world that is cruel, that rejects you, that certainly doesn't show comfort and warmth or any of those things. Let me make sure that I equip them with tools. Now, those tools were not things that it perhaps worked in hell, but when you come to Earth and you're dealing with humanity and humans, I mean, human beings, my gosh, like so complex, so multi-layered. So those tools didn't work for this situation. And she really had to fight and claw and figure out and fall on her face, and reject everything she learned from her mother, and in a weird way reject her mother, because when we look at that relationship, it didn't end well. She never got to have the closure. Her mother didn't take that leap of faith, and that's the thing I'm so proud of with Mazikeen, is at the end of season 6 she takes the leap. She did the thing her mother couldn't do, and that for me is like her growth over the course of the series.
Yeah. And also because she is a character that has such strength and such ferocity as well, those types of people tend to be someone where everybody else expects them to take the lead and starts to lean on them. And we've seen with Maze as well that people have taken advantage of those traits within her. But I feel like that's also a big thing that leads into the dynamic with Eve, where Eve is happy to stand there right by her side and be the person that takes the lead in certain moments as well and figure out problem solving. And so how did you think that that influenced and shifted and evolved Maze as a character and some of the spaces that you carried her to as a result of that dynamic?
I read a quote recently, which was like, behind every strong person are the reasons they had to be, and it really did resonate for me in regards to Mazikeen. She had her reasons, and coming into this relationship with Eve, it challenged all of those reasons. And accepting love from someone who just loves you warts and all, like that's such a foreign idea, a foreign concept to her. So you see her kind of being tethered to her old way of dealing with things, her old knee-jerk reactions, but at the same time just willing herself to maybe take a leap of faith here, maybe accept someone's love, maybe believe that she is worthy of this relationship, and so it's that constant struggle between those two, that I think a lot of the audience really relates to, because I've certainly, people always say to me, like, you're so strong and you can just like go, keep going and like no matter what. And that is, for a lot of strong women, that is our superpower, is that we are able to just like, chin up, keep going, no bullshit, for a lack of a better word, just keep moving on. But that comes at a cost eventually. It's exhausting to be strong all the time, and sometimes even the strongest people want a partner, wants a friend, wants someone that they can lean into. And I think she finally gets that in Eve.
Yeah. And with the fact that she is in this space where she's being loved unconditionally and for all of her flaws as well, being part of that, how did you then translate that into the internal journey that she's continuing with herself? Because it feels like that's also a big reason that she's able to make peace with and love a lot of her own flaws herself as well. So there's a real internal journey that we get to see her go on as a result of that.
Well, I think that's just like growth, that's sitting and pondering and thinking about and reflecting on experiences, everything from, meeting Trixie and making that childlike connection. I think that's why she understood Trixie, because kids will just say what they think and how they feel. And it's very Maze, to her coming out scene with Linda, like, I'm a demon, you're a human, and like we're still the same people. Why can't we still be friends? To finding her voice and calling out Lucifer or other characters who've taken her for granted or taken her strength for granted or just assumed she would always be there. So I think a lot of her growth happens sort of, in between seasons, I guess. We can only show so much of it on a show. But when I look at specific relationships to each individual character, she's taking lessons from Dan, from Linda, from Lucifer, certainly from Amenadiel, really things that she believes to be true, and then are challenged by these friends who go, actually, it doesn't have to be the way it is. I think probably at night, she sits back, has a whiskey, and like thinks about it, and then sort of shows up. And I think in season 6, even on her wedding night, where she really turns up for her friend Dan, it's like old Maze probably would have been like, no, this is my wedding night. I'm supposed to be swinging, from the ceiling with my wife. Like, but here I am, trying to help you in this moment because you're struggling, because I care about you and I know that you need me right now. And that's so far from the Maze that you met in the pilot, in Lux.
And with that idea that you were bringing up, in the way that she really does evolve and develop certain characteristics and certain traits from each of the individual relationships and learns from each of them uniquely, what's your process and journey of looking at both the scripts but also the way that these actors are performing these characters in scenes together, and then really stepping back and thinking about what is it that she's going to absorb as a character from these interactions and from these moments?
I think as an actor, our fiduciary responsibility is to find the truth within an imaginary circumstance, and to make these words sound as though they're the first time you're saying it, and very real and truthful. So you do the work at home. The lines are typically the last thing I worry about. It's really finding out what I want in that scene, coming back to like who, why, where, what, what will happen if I don't get it. And then I do that work, but it's you have to also be malleable once you get to set, because then you're walking onto set, you have props, you're in costume, you're exploring a scene for the very first time, and with an actor who maybe is going to throw you another curveball. So you have to be able to, I guess I lean into the Meisner technique, just living moment to moment. I've often walked into a scene with some ideas, and then it's like it gets thrown out the window because I'm getting a volley from my scene partner, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting, this is fun. It's still truthful to what I think the scene is about, but I'm approaching it from a different way, and that's okay. And it's sort of like inviting the cooks into the kitchen, because you're going to have ideas, your scene partner is going to have ideas, the director may have an idea as well, and it's all kind of sort of, and often I've been there where a director is watching something and they had an idea, and they'll see the actors do something completely different, and they're like, that works, that's totally it. So I think it's being open to the process of exploring, but certainly coming in prepared, because talent may fail you on the day, but the work will never fail you.
And with that same idea of keeping a lot of openness for the moment, you know, I know that Ildi and Joe, who are the showrunners, have always been very open and having conversations with you and before season, giving a little bit of a sense of this is where your character arc is going. These are some of the details. These are going to be some of the key moments. And the way that I've heard you talk about it, you've always said that you like to know certain details, but you don't want to know everything. And so for you, what's the level or amount of information or the key details that are most useful for you to start thinking about and figuring out your arc for a season versus the spaces where you really want to step back and just leave it a little bit more up to the moment, episode by episode?
Well, typically the process would be at the beginning of a season, the showrunners and the writers room would invite us and we'd have a discussion about where characters were going, and then they would listen to our ideas and, you know, what we would like. I have been asking for Mazikeen to have a girlfriend for a very long time, and not just a girlfriend, but like explore a same-sex relationship as we would any other relationship, you know, with just genuine love and care, and not impose our ideas on it. So that typically would happen. And then, you know, there are the main arcs that need to be adhered to because it serves a bigger purpose than just your singular character. It has to move the A storyline along. And so sometimes you have to work within that. You know, as a character, we all have wish lists of things we would love to do, but it has to ensure that we're servicing like the show Lucifer and not the show Mazikeen, which, you know, it's not my show. But there's certainly room, and we're blessed to have a very collaborative writers room who, and that I guess is built on trust. You know, we have a group of people who, we have actors who genuinely care about the show and the characters, who want to put their best foot forward. And that's always the best sort of place to be on a show, because, you know, people aren't showing up with ego. They're there to make it better. To like, let's make it better, or, you know, let's do our best within like what we have to do, and like how do we elevate this, you know. So I like to know broad strokes, but finer details I like to find out sort of episode to episode when I'm reading it. And often, a lot of the times, the first time I would read the script is when we have our table read, unless I couldn't be at the table read, then of course I'm doing my own work, because I like to see what other actors are doing, you know, in that first initial read. You know, by the end of 6 years, you know, this character is like a second skin to you, so their point of view is so ingrained in you. So I like to sit and see like what are the choices other actors are making.
Mm-hmm. And with that idea of the autonomy, but also the protectiveness that you develop with a character over 6 seasons in particular, as you've been kind of going through storylines and going into this season, what are the spaces in which you've always felt that you need to retain in order to keep her authentic as a character and authentic to herself? Because you're always balancing this really interesting line between carrying her into the space of having more humanity, but still always coming back to the idea that she is a demon, and straddling those two stratospheres within her at every beat.
I think sometimes vernaculars and like the way she speaks, I would always be very specific about that. You know, like, I made a deal refers to Lucifer as Lucy, like Mazikeen never does. So it's like little things like that where you keep the hierarchy or the respect between the two characters and their relationship. Language was a big thing for me, because I think, you know, I had originally, funnily enough, read this character as having a British accent, like much in the same way as Tom. I was like, she's otherworldly, she's old worldly, like this would make sense. It wasn't until the end of the pilot where I said to Lane, yeah, I always thought that she would have British accent. He was like, oh my God, this is a great idea. Why didn't we do that? I'm like, I don't know. I asked before I auditioned. But I think her language is very specific for me. Her costumes, for sure. I think, you know, I really was very hands-on in the process of her overall sort of look. I wanted to bring in some pieces that looked like they were brought from the bowels of hell with her. And then, when she becomes a bounty hunter, they're more practical because, you can't be running around getting bad guys in a cape. It's not a practical thing in Los Angeles. To scenes where she really does have like formal attire when she, goes to God and asks for a soul. I think that's showing respect to like a higher power and a being. So her overall look was very important to how she entered a room. And I really thankfully had producers who understood like it was really important to me to like be a part of that process.
Mm-hmm. One of the looks in this season that I actually wanted to ask about specifically was the outfit that she ends up wearing on her wedding night when she shows up to help Dan, because it's this fluffy pink nightgown with like an actual cat, like a soft cat around the waistband. And so in collaboration with the costume department, how did all of the different detailings and layerings of that outfit come together?
So that's like Eve's fantasy, right? Is this like crazy anime character. And it's such a confronting visual for a character like Mazikeen, who's typically in a darker hue and sort of, chains and that sort of stuff. So we wanted to really have the audience go like, whoa, like what is that? Originally, they wanted me to be naked and just have like, and I was like, no, I'm not down for that. for that. But here's something interesting that we could, I think would be, quite humorous, but also plays into Eve's sort of playful personality, and showing that, look, this hard character who is all these things that you've come to know really is just doing that very human thing of like trying to please her wife. So we just really like, we looked at anime characters. We loved the pink wig. I had sort of worn a pink wig previously in the show. We played around with blue contact lenses, and we threw in the cat accoutrements and the bows and the fluff, and to really just, the cast hadn't seen me, so all of their reactions are like legit. They were like, whoa, what is that? And I guess it did its job.
I also wanted to talk about Mazikeen's love language when it comes to her friendships and those relationships, because she always has a way of expressing herself without ever saying the thing out loud. So when she's saying goodbye to Lucifer after the wedding and he tries to hug her, her immediate response is to give him a switchblade, but we know how much that actually means to her and what that gesture means. Or with Amenadiel, training with the LAPD, she won't go out and say that she's proud of him, but we know in the way that she approaches it that that's ultimately what she's telling him and communicating. And so how within all these dynamics have you always sought to figure out what that unspoken and different version of love language is going to be with her? Because it's not even something where she has one specific way of expressing it to everybody. It's so unique with each of the characters.
Yeah. And I think that is really that speaks to, I guess I approached it the way I do when I do a present. Like, I am the best gift giver. And it's so specific to the person, because I really do take the time to listen over the course of like a few months leading up to the birthday, so you never feel like it's just, oh, something I just picked up along the way, so I think I kind of approached it in a similar way, was just really listening to them and figuring out, okay, where are we at in our relationship? And if I was a child, because I come back to her childlike qualities, like, how would I show you that I cared about you? And my son, who's 4 years old, he does this in like different ways. Sometimes it's like helping me make his bed. Sometimes he'll eat all his lunch, and that's his way of showing me he loves me, because he's like, look, mama, I ate my lunch and I'm growing for my nutrition. So for her, it's it's exactly that. It's like a lot of what she says, is not on the page, it's what she's doing, and it's what the camera is capturing in the moment. And so for Lucifer in that final scene, her blades, as the audience knows, is like an extension of her hands, you know, and that is the ultimate gift. And what we wanted to do is mimic, what I wanted to do is mimic what her mother gave to him in the ring in season 4. And so we actually reworked that scene with the writer, Chris, and he was so gracious and open to my ideas, because initially it kind of bumped for me and I wasn't sure that we were, you know, he had a wonderful sort of foundation in the scene, but I wanted to get really specific about these two, not just like, you know, because it was like the hardest goodbye, you know, of the sort of friends, right? Is like his oldest friend, and for her oldest friend. So I really wanted to pay homage to that relationship and to what we built for 6 years. And then I was really happy to see how they used it in the last scene, the giving of the blade, and how it comes into play, you know, at the end of the show. But yeah, it's I guess my approach was just to be very specific with each individual relationship and to look back at that.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned that this is the first time that you've taken a character right from the beginning of the show and been able to carry them all the way through to the end. So in looking back at working on this show for the last 6 seasons, how has that been a completely different exercise? And what are the ways in which it's caused you to think differently about your work as an actor and how you think about character throughout the show?
I think, you know, I've always loved film because I think you get a script, so you get to see a beginning, a middle, and end, right? So you have an overall arc. Television is challenging in that way, particularly network television, because it's really just like episode to episode, season to season. And that unknown at times I felt really, really challenging, and the pace at which it went. That being said, I'm grateful for that experience because you get to work and develop things way quicker. You get to pick up on, you know, I could read a script or sides like once or twice and like be off book immediately. So you just train yourself, you train a muscle. But an overall character development, I think the thing I look at is really that extended collaborative process that you have on television versus film, where you do get to season have input. And I look at her journey and starting sometimes backwards, like, what do I really want her to do and how do we get there? Like what is a comment I really want to make about family or about women or about friendship, for example. What was very important to me with Linda was that when we were having struggles as women, it wasn't over a guy. This is like, we've seen that before in television. So like we started backwards and then we worked our way forward. But I think I take away the time I've had to really get to know her, and pulling, you know, visual references for her. You know, Lilith was very much Eartha Kitt, you know, so leading up to that episode, I was watching a lot of Eartha Kitt clips and movies and getting her kind of the way she was very feline-like, you know, in her movements and the way she talked. And so it's really that, I guess, the time to explore her as a character that sometimes you don't have in film necessarily, or you have at least a limited time to do it, and then you've got to move on to that next thing. But she lives with you in between seasons when you're on TV. You know, I don't get away from her too much.
Well, I love everything that you've done with her as a character and the way that you've approached her through your performance, and really look forward to seeing what you carry through into your next projects. Thank you so much, Lesley-Ann.
Oh, thank you so much, Mara. Have a great day.